you for tuning in to CTC TV. My name is Sarujan Kanavadipillai. This week, we'll have Vani Selvarajah joining us. She is an articling student at Jackman and Associates and has spent the last month in Geneva representing Lawyers' Rights Watch Canada. She recently wrote an op-ed for the Toronto Star titled Sri Lanka on Notice, Where Do We Go From Here? Thank you for joining us today, Vani. So since independence in Sri Lanka, there has been systematic discrimination against the Tamil people. Starting with the Citizenship Act and the Single Only Act, there's been consecutive systematic policies in place to block equality for the Tamil people there. So for the first 30 years, there were peaceful political approaches to reaching equality and peace. Upon hitting a wall and not getting anywhere with it, there was a shift to an armed struggle. The next 30 years resulted in the war in Sri Lanka. For the last 3 years, there has been a shift back to the political approach and the peaceful approach. If it didn't work 30 years ago, why would it work now? Has anything changed to make that approach more hopeful now?
So this resolution is unseen, it's historical, and it's the first of its kind. The previous agreements that were entered into by the government in the past were different because they were entered within the sovereign borders of Sri Lanka. This resolution that came out of the 19th session this past March is the first of its kind in which the international community has finally stepped in. And it's different because Sri Lanka has suffered from a 30-year-long civil war in which several thousands of lives have perished. And for the first time, the international community is stepping in, and it sent a really strong message. The Sri Lankan government has used the idea of sovereignty as a defense for its actions. And the message that was sent by the UN in Geneva was that if a state cannot respect the human rights of its citizens within its sovereign borders, then state sovereignty no longer becomes a shield. And that is when the international community will step in. And that is exactly what has happened in the past session.
Okay. And so the difference between now and 30 years ago is that there's more involvement from the international community, and we're not in this alone.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
That is definitely fair to say, because as an articling student, while I was in law school, I learned about international law in the books, and you see how it's supposed to work. But being in Geneva for a month, I saw that it was completely and utterly different than anything that I've learned in the books. You realize that political interests played a huge role in Geneva. And when you really think about the Human Rights Council, you think about the 47 member states who are able to vote. And if they really did have their objective as human rights, what they're supposed to do, then this resolution should have passed with ease. But it actually didn't, because a lot of these states were blinded by political interests. But there are some countries who are on the fence. They don't know whether they're going to vote for the resolution or they're going to vote against the resolution. And that's where NGOs, human rights defenders, activists play a very crucial role. Because when we were there, our task was to inform. It was simply to inform, because one would assume that government representatives would know the reality of what happened in Sri Lanka. But the sad reality is that they don't. So when we were there, we met with representatives from each country, and we gave the facts, we gave the figures of what transpired in Sri Lanka. And so when the final day, when the voting day came, we were able to sit back and know that these guys have the information in front of them and that they would make the right decision. And when you look at the votes, people did make the right decisions. People who were voting for human rights voted for this resolution. And so that's the importance of NGOs and activists and human rights defenders. Now, ideally speaking, you would want representatives from Sri Lanka to be on the ground and to explain their own stories. Right. Unfortunately, that necessarily was not the case. We had very few brave souls who were actually there from the ground in Sri Lanka. And these people faced a lot of intimidation, harassment by the Sri Lankan government. And this is why the international diaspora has a very important role to play, because by being there, we were advocating for the rights of people in Sri Lanka who were unable to come. So you ask yourself this question: why did the Sri Lankan government send a 71-member high-level delegation to the Human Rights Council? Why is it so firmly opposed to the passage of this resolution? Realistically speaking, a government sends maybe 7 to 10 delegates to the Human Rights Council. But when Sri Lanka sent such a high level and 71 member delegation, countries definitely notice this. So what is it that they're trying so hard to hide? What folks who criticize the passage of this resolution fail to realize is that for the first time in 30 years, the Sri Lankan government has gone up in arms in preventing the passage of such a resolution. So when we look at all of this, we have to realize that, you know what, we are doing something right. And it definitely is a step forward in the right direction. And we have a lot of work to do in the future.
The end of the war in 2009, many feel that the situation in Sri Lanka has not gotten better. Examples are militarization, colonialization, there's still women being raped. And so when people look at that situation, they feel that the only solution could be an independent Tamilulam. If we look at some of the more, even the resolution and some of the more recent actions, the dialogue has slightly shifted to potentially working within a united Sri Lanka and getting equality and peace within a united Sri Lanka. So has the conversation around an independent Tamilulam stopped?
The idea of a separate state has and continues to be on the minds of Tamil people within and outside of Sri Lanka. That being said, the state that Sri Lanka is in right now, the idea of federalism and devolution of power should be closely looked at. That being said, it does not undermine the right of succession or self-determination of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. This issue was closely looked at by the Supreme Court of Canada in 1998. And Supreme Court of Canada is an institution which is in high regard amongst countries throughout the world. And in 1998, they looked at the issue of whether Quebec could separate from Canada. And they decided that Quebec could not unilaterally separate from Canada without a referendum because certain conditions, as they outlined, were not met. The people of Quebec were not an oppressed people. Their physical and cultural integrity were not attacked, and they had equal access to government. When you look at our prime ministers, many of them have come from Quebec. But you take those conditions and you apply it to the people of Sri Lanka. The Tamil people have and continue to be an oppressed people. Their physical and cultural integrity continue to be attacked on a day-to-day basis. And you ask yourself this question: has there ever been a Tamil president in Sri Lanka? Or will there ever be a Tamil president in the foreseeable future? Highly unlikely. So when you take those conditions and you apply it to the people of Sri Lanka, yes, their right to self-determination and their right to secede from Sri Lanka as per international law will continue to exist so long as the Tamil people of Sri Lanka their integrity continues to be attacked, and so long as the people of Sri Lanka continue to be an oppressed people. So it is also important to note that the Tamil National Alliance has been elected by the people of Sri Lanka, and they have been given a mandate, and we have to support and encourage them in working towards this mandate. And it is in that light that the international community has to have a very responsible approach in how we deal with the future steps that Sri Lanka has to take from here onwards.
Thank you for providing us insight into what happened in Geneva and providing us some historical and legal context to Sri Lanka and Canada. Thank you, Vani.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you for tuning into CTC TV once again. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to your feedback. Please provide us feedback at ctctv@canadianthamilcongress.ca. Let us know if there's other people that you would like us to interview, if there are any questions that remain unanswered, and we'll do our best to get back to you personally or on camera.